Dude, guys, my life is crazy. I'm about to interview one of the most powerful and influential financial executives in the world. So Bunty Bohra, wow, it's been a decade in the making. I've seen you all over the world in all sorts of different scenarios. And this is so great to have you on Upgrade Me. I think people are inspired by your story. I definitely am, at the perfect timing as well, at the juncture of, hell meets heaven and everything in between. My first question, all I can say is, what the
That's actually what I'm thinking right now. I mean, I remember when I first met you, it was in Tianjin in China, and you were at the World Economic Forum summer event, and you were with DJ Qbert.
Yes.
And you did a demonstration. Okay, with my first Wall Street bonus, just a quick aside story, I bought two turntables, like two Technics 1200s. I literally walked to J&R Music World in New York City, bought them, and I still don't know how to use them.
And they were like, Russell Peters, welcome back.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it felt like. They're like, what are you doing with this? And by the way, that's a nice tie. Yeah. But I saw that and I was like, man, that guy is cool. I want to get to know him. And here we are. So.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's a way down the spiral already. I feel like we've had a lot of fun questions for you, but we had to get to the kind of meat and potatoes of things. I'm sure you hear it all the time. We're hearing tariffs. We're hearing, everybody out there is terrified, if you know what I mean. What I can say is I tried to be a little organized here. I said, we're amidst the daily roulette in markets, bonds, policy shuttering, war, terrifying. Trump season one, it seemed like he had alliances that made it clear where things were going to go in the world. One of the examples that me as a layman found was that there was a infrastructure race between the US and China on 5G in terms of building towers and being able to flex and say they had the first substantive network.
Yeah.
And so, companies like AMT, American Tower Corporation, they flourished under that. They made alliances. You could figure out who the buddies were. Trump's a businessman. But now it seems like I certainly don't see where the alliances are and where this is going. In short, what do you make of what's happening right now?
Yeah, I mean,
are there alliances to be seen, or are there, any patterns from the past that we can look at?
Yeah, I'll get to your alliances question. But first, I think a couple things that are important to understand. And I think this is now getting to be understood by people, but I don't think they appreciate it ahead of time. First of all, Trump believes in tariffs, right? He has been consistently on message since the 1980s that if the world wants to access the US economy, this beautiful, big, vibrant, but more importantly, in a fundamental way, high consumption economy, they should have to pay a price.
Right.
Think of it as like a cover charge to go into a cool bar, a cool club, because that's a service that they can't get anywhere else in the world. That's an opportunity can't get anywhere else in the world. Or to use economic terms, it's a place where excess production can be absorbed, in like no other place in the world.
Sure. So in a way, it's like playing the coolest club because you could just sell your merch there.
Exactly. I think his predecessors for many, many years, and certainly like post-World War II, when the world order as we know it was sort of designed, I think there was this understood idea that, okay, the US is the biggest slice of the economic pie globally. And so anything that's good for the whole pie, the US gets the lion's share of, or it gets at least a plural share of. And so, let's have open trade. Let's be an engine for consumption, for economic growth, prosperity. And then, the US will be the beneficiary of that. But he never believed that, right? I mean, as far as anything that's been recorded in terms of his thoughts. So I think that's one thing that people, I think, maybe misunderstood initially. They thought this was negotiating, or they thought he was just beating his chest. No, this is a fundamental, deep down belief of his.
Right.
I think the second thing to know about Trump, and then I'll get to the alliance bit of this, is, there's two and there's a little third one. But the second thing I think that's really important to understand is that his first term, I don't think that he got as much done as he wanted. One, it was clearly just rookie season. So it made a lot of rookie mistakes. But probably the most fundamental rookie mistake, and had a lot of turnover in his staff. But I think the first rookie mistake was he got really, the whole administration, they really, really went hard on healthcare. because they for whatever political or belief reasons, they really wanted to overturn like the existing healthcare regime, and they didn't get it done, and they burned a lot of time, like a year basically, and then you're in midterms, and then you're in lame duck. So I think that coming in, it was the clear mandate was, okay, we have this list of like 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever main directions of travel, like things, the border, taxes, trade, and so on. And we're going to go hard on them without like missing a beat, because we've got to get it done. And we're not going to get stuck or go down a rabbit hole of something that can't get done. So that's why I think the tariffs were kind of like brushed out the door a bit. The third thing, which I think everybody does know, is that he very much values people who are loyal to him. Whether that's family members or people who sing the same song that he wants to sing. You can debate whether that's the right way or the wrong way to run a country as opposed to a family business, but it is what it is, and he is the president of the United States of America. So when it comes to alliances, I think that we always have to frame it in the context of he's going to start from the position that the U.S. is the stronger hand. The U.S. is the more important country, the more powerful country, the more sort of energized economy.
Sure.
So he's going to play from the perspective of like, we can win any fight, or we can win any debate, or we can win any deal. Right. So that's one thing that he's going in, which is why he appears to bully certain countries and appears to maybe specifically, I'd say in the case of China and even the EU to some extent, it looks like he's like almost unreasonable in not backing down or like being more compromising, because he's like, but why would I? Like, we're the world champions of everything. So why would I try to tie for second place? I think the loyalty thing plays out a little bit also, which is that he likes people he likes.
Sure.
And so if he has a positive vibe for whatever reason, right? Because people question some of his crushes, like Putin, really, or even question like whether he's reading the room well. Like he's like, oh, me and she are like very close, and it's like, really, because it doesn't look like it. I mean, I have a TV, and it doesn't look like it.
Right. Yeah.
But he will gravitate towards people, no matter sort of like what we might think of them, that he feels like are his, I don't want to say equals, but his kind of like contemporaries. And then, of course, the third thing, which is kind of I referenced earlier, is that he's in a rush. So what you have is, okay, who can we beat up? Because I don't think highly of them.
Right.
Canada, for instance, beat them up, right? Quick.
Yeah.
Who do I like or think is like kind of like my kind of guy or gal? And that's where you get, some of the more autocratic leaders in the world. But by the way, going back to square, like, kind of the first principles, there's going to be tariffs. Like, you're going to have to pay a price. So we're debating the price. We're not debating whether or not you're paying a price. You're just paying a price, and we're debating the price.
Sure.
And so I think where you're going to end up with alliances is they're going to be like frenemy alliances. This is my just kind of independent thinking. It's going to be like China, where it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be tension-free. It's going to be combative. But it could also be, let's say Japan, where the US and Japan have an incredibly strong, relationship on economy, on military cooperation.
Sure.
And as it turns out, in the case of Japan, the Japanese sort of needs right now complement the US ones. They, I think, generally want to have a stronger yen so that their people, the citizens of Japan, can travel, and it doesn't feel like it costs an arm and a leg. They can buy foreign things, and it doesn't feel like they're having to pay an extended price. And they want to kind of revitalize their economy generally, and the U.S. being the big consumer. So those things work because I think the U.S. kind of wants to have a weaker dollar, so they become more competitive, in the kind of export market. They want a weaker, they kind of, what they want and what Japan wants are not in conflict with each other. And then you'll have one-off, like he likes, the guy in this South American country, or likes the gal in that part of Europe because, they kind of they vibe, right? So I don't think his alliances are going to be built on this sort of top-down view of okay, all the strategic gambits that you play, what's the composite mosaic of that for the world? I think he's just like, you, not you. Hey, come here. No, not you. Or here, you pay extra.
Sure.
So it will feel very random. It will feel very disorganized. But one of the things about the US, Trump or otherwise, is that it is controlled chaos. It's a very anti-fragile system. There are a lot of natural benefits to the structure, but also a lot of things that look like bugs in the system that are actually features that have to do with like the way the government operates, the kind of messiness, the independence of the states, the border, the border's ability to allow in a lot of immigration, which isn't really, we think of that as like, as Americans, we think of that as like, it's natural. Like, I mean, you didn't come off the Mayflower, neither did I.
Sure.
But, we're Americans, right? And we happen to be living somewhere else. So I think all of those things contribute to like an anti-fragility or like a resilience of the U.S. that he can lean into quite a bit. But it will be messy and it'll hurt people's eyes because it won't look as, the world won't seem as, much in the trend of globalization. It won't feel as much in the sense of like in the trend of like cooperative or co-opetition. It'll feel a little bit more, aggressive and antagonist. It is what it is though. It's cycle.
What I'm learning from you is that you feel you haven't mentioned that it's more like industry agnostic, that it's not industry specific as it may have been in the first term, that it's more like based on personal feel, personal relationship is kind of just like, a bit of shooting from the hip. But we do see some exemptions kind of coming to the table, right? Within the tech industry, like kind of the bigger players coming and saying, hey, look, like we need some sort of backdoor deal or some sort of pipeline, like for example, Apple, right, coming in and saying we can't operate. But, I don't know if that's true or not, but they're claiming they can't operate at the current rate of kind of change.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. So I guess what I'm getting is you don't know either.
I definitely don't know. I mean, listen, if I knew, you and I'd be doing this from a private jet.
Right. Yeah. Next episode.
So obviously, nobody really knows.
Sure. No, I'm joking.
No,
you have
of
a lot
course.
more track record and experience than I do. But
no. But it's not. I mean, I think that what as it relates to some of these exemptions, I think despite what it looks like, and I'm not trying to defend the guy. I'm just trying to understand the guy.
Yeah, me too.
Because a lot of people will say things like, he's so unpredictable. And I'm like, you know what? I think he's super predictable because I think you know exactly where he stands on everything.
Yeah.
Now, the magnitude of how he expresses that. So he says there's going to be tariffs and people, okay, so there's going to be tariffs, but you get yourself in this headspace of like, so it'll be 10% across the board, or it'll be reciprocal, like, well, even Steven with whoever,
245.
or it'll be, exactly. Yeah. So, or it'll be very strategic, like, okay, chips, that's really important for national security, or, or whatever. And then he comes out and it's like 150, 250, 300%. And it's like, bananas are being tariffed. And you're kind of like,
penguins
you're like,
on an
okay,
island by themselves.
Then people are like, he's so unpredictable. And I'm like, no. You knew tariffs were coming. You just didn't know that it was going to be 200% and like bananas, right? So the volatility around him or the dispersion of like how he expresses this kind of like these views is the thing I think that's more confusing than anything else. But I think also he's not emotionally attached to that. So he'll come in one day and be like 200, and then he's like, I have a wonderful deal and it's 0%. We're gonna, and people are like, what, you flip-flopped, like what, and I don't think he cares. I think he's, kind of like a real estate guy in that respect. It's like, okay, the property went bankrupt, here, take the keys, bank, your loan is gone, or whatever, I changed my mind. Yeah. So in a way you could maybe argue that he's more flexible, and practical, even if he sounds like he's more, dogmatic or like petulant in the way that he expresses it, which is, why I think these exemptions are being characterized in some ways as like some retreat, or like losing face, or he has to go back on what he said. Right. Which is true because he went in there with like some like block and it's confusion altogether. Yeah. But he probably realized like, well, that's too expensive. That doesn't make sense anymore. Okay, so let's roll that back. Okay, these guys are calling me and they're saying that this is gonna break down. Well, we can't have that. So let's do that. Sure. So I don't think that there's some huge master plan here. I do think that this is as chaotic as it looks. Right. But I don't think it's wildly unpredictable or that we get to necessarily the wrong place in the end. We just may take a really like scenic route or maybe like, kind of difficult route to get there. And path dependency is a thing, so businesses or people and people like governments are trying to react to this, this to and fro.
Right.
And it's not as smooth or as quiet or as sort of incremental as perhaps we've grown accustomed over the last 20, 30 years, particularly, since I would say, since the fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall, I think it's been pretty much like a relatively peaceful, relatively globalizing, relatively cooperative and incremental sort of foreign policy, or global policy interplay.
Sure.
And now it feels a little bit more erratic, but so it's noisier than we're used to. But I don't think we get to a very, very different place than we would if it was kind of like the old ways. In fact, we may, in some instances, get to a worse place, but that may not be that big of a deal. In some cases, we may get to a much better place because the aggression and the kind of the forced, sort of creative destruction around this to make it happen might actually get to superior regime change kind of outcomes. Not wearing a MAGA cap. Not wearing a MAGA cap, okay? Just saying.
See the back.
Yeah.
Turn it inside out.
Yeah, well, it's probably made in China anyway. So.
Exactly. A lot of folks I've talked to that have known you for a while have mentioned that you're very proud of having gone to MIT.
Yeah.
And that, so what can you tell me? What is the science of management?
Because I have a degree that's called management science.
Yeah.
Well, I think first it just starts with they just decided to call their undergraduate business, degree management science because I think that, felt more MIT-ish than, business administration or something like that.
Yeah.
But to get so this is something that I'm a little bit rusty on because it's been a few years, but I think they probably haven't changed too much. If anything, they probably kept this part the same. To get a degree at MIT in, say, physics or electrical engineering or chemical engineering, you have to take 2 semesters of calculus, 2 semesters of physics, a semester of chemistry, a semester of biology, 2 sciences outside of your major, a lab class, and then 8 humanities, some of which have to be in the same concentration, and some of which have to be in different, intentionally different categories to get diversity, right? To do a degree in poetry, you have to do that also, right?
MIT.
2 semesters of physics, 2 semesters of calculus, semester. Wow. So there's this huge institutional requirement for everybody, no matter what you do, to be highly technical and technically proficient in a way that is no other school that I know of, maybe Caltech, but no other school has. They might have strict requirements, but they don't have requirements on STEM that are that high, universally. So it's kind of you're going to MIT, it's hard to escape being MIT.
Right.
So even if you take the degree in management science, some of the required classes, at least when I was there, you had to take linear algebra. Okay, I don't think of that as an undergraduate business class, but linear algebra. Yeah. You have to take a class in statistics. But this is an MIT class in statistics. This isn't Khan Academy statistics, for dummies. Yeah. You have to take, again, they have management laboratory classes, which might be on different topics, but laboratory here doesn't mean beakers and test tubes. It means, something that's practical and sort of hands-on and applied. So I do think that in addition to the institute requirements, you have within majors, including management science, you have a set of requirements that bring a more quantitative or more analytical, a more scientific, version of the same content, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the baseline's a lot more fortified, I guess.
Yeah, and it plays out also not even just in the course selection, but in how the courses are sort of delivered. So if you take an intro economics class at Harvard, for instance, you're going to probably write some decent number of essays. Right. Okay. But if you take an economics class, the intro microeconomics, let's say, class at MIT, which is literally 14, that's the major, and then 0.01, 1401, because all the classes are numbered, so it's the first class. I learned partial derivatives in that class before we got to it in calculus. Because to do the homework, you need to understand partial derivatives.
Sure.
Even I'm like, what's a partial derivative? I mean, even today, I got the degree, so they can't take it back. But partially, yeah, partially, understanding that. But so even in the way the classes are expressed, so like I said, Harvard, you're going to be writing essays and story problems and describing your view of something. Yeah. Maybe, again, I don't know because I never took those classes. But at MIT, your economics homework is going to be problem sets. They're going to look like math homework, but they're going to be economic math as opposed to math. Right. And even your essays are going to be writing math
as opposed to the Matt Damon math.
Yeah. That school actually is funny because Good Will Hunting came out around the time that I graduated, and so it was like a big boost for the school because it was a pretty dorky school. Like it might still be, but it definitely was not. It was definitely
that answer didn't it
was
definitely that picture.
Yeah, well, it was self-selected. Let's just be clear, right? It was a pretty self-selected population. Yeah. But the big boost, to be honest, is all the Marvel superheroes that like are considered to be like super smart or super cool. They either went to MIT or tried to go to MIT, right? So it's like Iron Man went to MIT, Spider-Man didn't get into MIT. It's like MIT is like laced throughout this whole Marvel cinematic universe. And I think that's actually what's made the school, in addition to just the change in technology and everything, I think it's actually been a really big brand booster for the school, to be honest. And so people are like, I want to go to MIT. I want to go to MIT. And I'm like, everyone wants to go to MIT until they get punched in the face. Because when you get there and it's like math without numbers, right, you're going to be like, oh, I changed my mind, uncle. Because that's what I was like. Thought I was good at this stuff until I actually had to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
But I'm very proud of having gone there and having survived it. Right. It was like when I was 9 years old, it's a place I wanted to go. Wow. I got in early. It was, it was the first truly big achievement that I felt like, wow, I did this.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've through whatever mechanisms and strategies, like your childhood is kind of a mystery to a lot of people who aren't close to you, right? Yeah. What was going on? Like, I know you spent some time in Ohio and then some time in Maryland. Like, I'm just learning about this, after knowing you for so long, about this dream, this 9-year-old dream of going to MIT. So, like, what was going on in your formative years, and that would bring you to such a space?
So, my story's actually not that unusual. It's my family immigrated from India to the U.S. in 1970. Right. So, and that has a bit of a moment in time historical context. Sputnik goes up. I think in 1965, Kennedy passes this Immigration and Naturalization Services Act, which basically said if you have technical background, you're coming for higher education, or if you have like expertise in certain fields, medicine, engineering, science, we'll take, you can have easy immigration into the U.S. And so at that moment in time, in that window of time, there were a lot of economies around the world that were not behind the Iron Curtain, that were miserable, but had a lot of people who had aspiration and had some of these skills. So you think of, Korea, which was basically facing bankruptcy. You think of India, which was, 99% effective tax rate and like basically it was like essentially a communist state. And so people go west and they try to find, their life there. So I was one of, I was the kid that was born to the parents who did that, who kind of got on the plane and tried to start their life. My dad came to the US to go to business school, as it turns out, in Ohio. So I was born in Cleveland, well, Cleveland Indian jokes, which is what I am, and lived in Ohio all over the state until 8th grade, so I was about 13. Yeah. And then my dad had a job transfer, took a new job, and we moved to actually not Maryland, to Virginia. My wife's family lives in Maryland, so I do spend a lot of time there. But Richmond, Virginia, or a suburb of Richmond, Virginia, is where I spent 8th, 12th grade. And in some ways, I consider that like my childhood home because that was where I was visiting, to my family later in life. Yeah. 9 years old, 3rd grade in Ohio, we had a assignment, in 10 years, I will ... And then you had to come up with 6 things that you're going to do when 10 years later. So I guess I would have been 19, 9 plus 10. And I asked the teacher, I said, will we be going to college by then? Actually, I really, really like Miss McCombs. She's my favorite teacher of all time. Just so great. And I appreciate some of the things she said. She said, some of us will choose you, some of us may not. There are lots of different things, but yes, you could be going to college then, which is actually for 1983. This is a pretty like thoughtful and like, because I just assumed everybody goes to college, but that's definitely not true. Only half of my graduating class went to college, including 2-year schools. Sure. So she had an appreciation for that. So I went home and I said, Dad, what's the best school for math and like science? Because those are two subjects that I liked in the world. He's like, I don't know. I think it's the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I was like, okay. So on this piece of construction paper, I write, I will attend the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I drew like literally like what looked like a podium. Turns out the dome actually kind of looks like that, but I had no idea. There's no internet, right? I had no idea. I couldn't even tell you where Massachusetts was. But it was in that moment, I was like, well, I guess that's the best one, so that's where I want to go. Right. And then I kept that dream alive, and there it is. But otherwise, had a pretty regular childhood. I mean, it was like, was Indian in places where there weren't always a lot of Indians. So, I got picked on a little bit, but I never took that stuff very, very personally, because I was different. I wasn't like a super physical guy or anything like that, kind of skinny little Indian kid. So, I had to survive a little bit of my own wits, which meant, a sense of humor. Right. But it's also like, but I was, I was precocious and outspoken, so I was kind of like the smart guy in the class a little bit. And, that's not the coolest thing to be, and I didn't have a filter or like any restraint. So I wasn't trying to make people feel bad. I would just get so excited about something. If I knew it, I'd be like, raising my hand, or I'd have a lot to say. And I think I was lucky that I had a lot of teachers that appreciated that. And I grew to end up having a lot of friends that appreciated that. And it was like, it wasn't necessarily cool, but it wasn't uncool. Right. But I wasn't the captain of the football team. I was more like, president of the class kind of guy by the time I got to high school. But Virginia was great because it gave me, actually moving every 4 or 5 years was really good for me, because I think I was changing so much and I could kind of reinvent myself, every 4 or 5 years, kind of so that people weren't thinking of me as the average of when they first met me to like now. And when I went to Virginia, it was right around, you're 13, 14 years old. So, you really are trying to be a little bit like, in my case, I was like, I kind of want to be like cooler, I want to be more like down and not just like be the smart, skinny Indian kid. And so I was able to sort of be a different person from what I was perceived as, but I was actually being more of the person I was at that moment in time. So it wasn't like I was faking it. I was just bringing myself to like market where I was. But it was a big culture shock. Richmond, Virginia has a lot of history. It's the capital of Confederacy. And, there was a lot of, overt things that would be and have been recently considered like just like explicitly racist, but not just like racist in terms of like you're different from me or xenophobic, but racist, going back to the Civil War. Right, fundamentally. Like, fundamentally, like a really dark period of time. So the names of the streets, the names of the schools, famously, Richmond downtown has an avenue called Monument Avenue, and it had all of these, Civil War heroes, but they're Southern, they're Confederate heroes. They've all been torn down now, which I think is actually a bit of a shame, but that's probably a political hot button. And I remember so I'm a tennis player, but I started playing tennis very seriously in Virginia. And one of the sons of Richmond is Arthur Ashe, who famously is like, one of the early African-American tennis players, won Wimbledon, amazing human being, came from like very humble roots. And they put a statue of him on Monument Avenue. Right. This is 87, 88, something like that. So I'm hearing on the radio all the controversy about this because Arthur Ashe is not a Confederate war hero. He is a Black tennis player who's HIV positive. And so I didn't understand all these like things. It's only now I can look back. Luckily, I have a memory for like what my third grade teacher or what I said, so I can appreciate them and learn from them now. At the moment, I didn't really know what the controversy was. But that was the kind of environment I grew up in. I kind of had to like, whoa, I'm a different person, but that different person, I'm different. I'm me, which is a different person than what people thought I was. But like now I'm in like I mean, I might as well have been in Mars. It felt like a different place. I know it sounds ridiculous for guys who lived on and traveled all around the world like you, but like, you know, like going from Cleveland to Toledo felt like a big deal. Going from Ohio to Virginia and that too, you know, yeehaw, Virginia was like, yeah, it was different.
Right, and just being able to sit in your own skin, right, and kind of
totally
come to terms with that relationship.
That's right. That's right.
What is authentically you,
and the Southern accent.
Yeah,
that's the other thing. You know, the Southern accent. Like, I mean, which I love and I can replicate pretty well now, at least a Richmond accent, and I can fall into it when I'm down there. But it's you know, that was just weird to me. Right. It was kind of foreign, and you know, it's like, okay, this is interesting. It was like a cultural experience to be there. But some best 5 years, some of the best years of my life were those 5 years.
I'm glad to hear.
Yeah.
Sounds like it was a balance of things, right? And kind of just the molecular kind of construction of you. A lot of people talk about what you mentioned in terms of like humor being a natural self-defense mechanism.
Yeah,
right?
probably
keeps you from getting your ass beat.
But keeps you getting beat up, or picked on.
Gets you in the conversation, right? It keeps you kind of like on your toes, keeps your mind sharp, keeps you know, people thinking about you. Right?
Yeah.
Like, did you have any like role models as you were kind of coming through these formative years and changing places? And because you are honestly, I think you're probably the funniest person that out of I know we may be shooting fish at the bottom of the barrel here, but all the people we've met within our World Economic Forum community, you're definitely the funniest one.
Oh, thank you.
And that's a combination of memory, like you said, it's wit, it's you know, it's recall, it's reaction time, it's senses, and you know, and sensitivity and desensitivity.
Yeah.
What were your role models? Who were you laughing to and looking up to?
That's a great. That's a trip down memory lane. There were comedians that I really, really loved. And you know, this was a time of like cassette tapes, so I would have like the audio tape and listen to them when I walked in. So one of the first ones that made a real impact on me, where I was like, "Oh shit, this is like I'm about this," was actually Robin Williams. Yeah. And I remember it was I was at a friend's birthday party, it was probably in 8th grade. I can't remember her name, but they put on Robin Williams live at the Met. And he was just like, okay, he was probably like full of cocaine and everything. Yep, but it was just the energy and like what he could say and just like the animation of it, like not so much the physical comedy of it, but just the wit and the kind of and the storytelling that he had, which I thought was like, oh, this is cool. Like I love this. But I'd say one of the most influential was Eddie Murphy.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was there were 3 again cassette tapes. I think one of them I had on videotape on a VHS, so I could watch it. But it was Eddie Murphy comedian, Eddie Murphy delirious, which I think is still one of the funniest like 1.5 hours you will ever experience in your life. Right. And then Eddie Murphy Raw, which is a bit more politically charged. At that point, he was like a real superstar. And so, you know, it had that a little bit of that energy, which was also cool to see. But I think what I loved about him was, first of all, his language was, I mean, he said fuck and shit and motherfucker with like such impunity. Right. Yeah. But it never felt offensive. You know, it wasn't like meant to hurt anybody. It was just like, shit, you know, or like this motherfucker, you know, like, you know, it was just part of his vocabulary. And it actually, to me, added a lot of texture to the stories. And also, if you're like 13, 14 years old and a kid growing up in a vegetarian Indian house and you're listening to that and you're like, he said fuck, he said so he good. You know, he talked about his dick. You know, I mean, it's just like, you know, you think it's like, so, you know, you kind of feel like you're having a bit of like escape and, you know, you feel like you kind of
guilty pleasure.
Yeah. And you're kind of like, you're like, I'm down, man. I'm in this. I get it. Yeah. But he was, I think, probably the most influential on me then. Then I started watching all these guys, and there was a kind of golden age of stand-up comics that came after that. I mean, everything. I mean, I listened to a lot of Andrew Dice Clay. Oh yeah. Because he was so shock oriented. Yes. You know, with it, like what he said, but he's a great storyteller. And the thing is that now people don't even know, you know, he shows up in movies as a totally different person. He's just like great. He's this great, like, it's a character. The Dice Man was a character. And so, you know, I think those were the ones that kind of influenced me a lot. And you'll notice they were all like, you know, pretty like on the limit in terms of either their energy or their language or even like their political incorrectness. I mean, the guys, of course, today, I mean, for me, it's like, Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle have always had a huge amount of affection for, but it's because now, to me, it's less about shock and it's more about the storytelling as a way to be a critic or to critique society.
Right.
In the way that like, a court jester looks, may like superficially look like a clown to just get like cheap laughs. But, he's whispering to the king and the court, he's whispering the frustrations of the people, or he's whispering the things that, they're getting like judged on. But he's coding it, in this kind of Shakespearean way, with like humor or with this delicacy. So you can't first you can't go behead him because you'd be like, why'd you cut the head off the clown?
It's just a joke.
It was just a joke, but the people who are listening, the message gets through. They're like, maybe I'm being a little hard on these guys, or maybe I gotta think about this a little bit more.
Sure.
And so I think that there's a real role for these performers, these comics, these satirists, to like as a way to sort of help some of the difficult conversations get through to people. But some people draw their battle lines. They're just like, you can't say that about those, that community, or they say you can't use that language. Which Eddie Murphy does that great impersonation of Bill Cosby, calling him saying, you cannot use words like, talking about the language of his show.
Sure.
And, meanwhile, it was like funny enough, right? It's characterized as Eddie Murphy being like sort of the bad guy and Bill Cosby being the good guy. And now we find out like it's pretty clear that didn't age well. I mean, we don't know. I'm pretty sure Eddie Murphy's not a bad guy, but I'm pretty sure we know that Bill Cosby is.
Right.
Jello pudding eating motherfucker.
Yeah.
Have a Coke and a smile,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, those guys, I think, were, like you said, they were inspirational to me because I felt that they were geniuses. And I love the idea of genius, in whatever field, and actually gravitated towards it. I wanted to understand how people thought. But also for me, it was a defense mechanism. But it became over time, and certainly today, I was going to say less of a defense and more of an offense, because my humor now, but like it's more like I don't need to defend myself. That's not what it's there for. Now it's a way for me to communicate ideas or to actually get people, into the conversation.
Right.
Or if you are going to get beat up, it's hard to want to beat somebody up who's making you laugh.
Right.
And I don't literally mean somebody's going to physically beat me up.
At the same time.
But it could be more of a negotiation, or it could be more of just a social setting. So it's not a beat up. It's like a beat up kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, they're not going to beat you up at the same time, or maybe they will laugh and beat you up. I don't know.
They will, yeah. Like, let's bring it, man. I mean, I'm certainly pushing. I push the line. I'm a line stepper, so I'm like pushing to see.
Right.
So far, so good. I'm still here.
Awesome. You talk a lot about process, and I think it comes from a very observative, highly like a high sense place. And before we talk more about like systems thinking and like observations, I remember one of the first. Actually, it was the first week I met you. We were at a conference, and you mentioned one of the biggest challenges with like these kind of high end, world leader conferences like WEF or the United Nations or COP or G12, Aspen Ideas, et cetera, is that the follow up and the deliverables are very difficult to reel in.
Yeah.
Right. And I believe the word you said is it's very difficult to solve global warming or hunger in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. So
I remember that.
Yeah. So if we reel back from that, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you, is if you were explaining this to, let's say a middle school child or an elementary school child, what are the fundamentals of financial literacy?
Wow, that's a interesting question. I mean, on the first, on the kind of build up, like my philosophy about this whole joke about you can't solve, world hunger or global warming or really anything in 45 minutes, sitting around in chairs in the ballroom of a hotel. Right. I've always had this view that whether it's a conference or even my own, in some of my jobs that leadership roles I had at Goldman Sachs when I was there, there's always this pressure to be like, okay, what's the next steps? What are the deliverables? What are we going to hold ourselves accountable to?
Right.
And I always sort of objected to that. And when I had the choice to, when I had the chance to sort of curate my own, like I was leading, the kind of the dialogue, I would be very explicit, like, we are not going to do next steps. We're not going to, because a next step presumes that everything we determined in this like room today somehow is like, we have to, like it's like the world is linear, and that like somehow if we go from here to here to even here, that defines success. But we have no idea what's going to happen with the passage of time. So I've always had this idea that like, or this concept or philosophy that we go there and we sort of like infect each other with our ideas. We infect each other with different points of view. We debate things vigorously and then don't come to a conclusion. So everybody's left feeling a little unsettled.
Sure.
Hemingway said something like, something along the lines of like, the reader's imagination is greater than the size of the page, right? So he says very little because their imagination makes much bigger stories than what he did if he spelled it out,
right.
And so to me, a lot of it is about infecting ideas. So financial literacy is a very interesting one, which I haven't really pounded the table on, but I've said in a few settings, including at Aspen Ideas and including at MIT, where I'm a advisor to the finance department there.
Right.
And at one point we were doing a curriculum review and I was kind of advocating for a finance class, which kind of doesn't feel like management science, right? There was a little bit more, I don't want to say dumbed down because that's not what I meant at all, but was more about intuition for people to understand certain concepts as opposed to learning financial mathematics so they become financial practitioners, right? And the kind of basis of, and I had actually an idea at Aspen Ideas, this is in 2009, I was actually talking to Arnie Duncan, who was the Secretary of Education. And I said, this should be something that should be taught in schools because financial literacy and financial kind of just concepts are actually universal. So what are those, like, as an example?
Yeah.
Well, we actually know them, or we've heard them before. So first of all, like a fundamental idea of modern finance theory is that there's a time value to money. $1 today or a rupee today, theoretically is worth more than one I give you in the future, right? Because there is some, you can do a financial math version of it that has to do with rates of return, interest rates and all that, but you can really just kind of talk about the intuition, which is that like having something now, you can do something with it. Having the same amount or the same thing later, it's like you don't have the use of that. Right. Yeah. That's an intuitive thing that would apply to a lot of different fields, or even like, even a lot of different aspects of life that aren't professional. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Why? Because if you drop the basket, all the eggs break. Okay. So also portfolio theory, right? And there's math behind it, right? You add these things that are not perfectly correlated. They move in different directions at different speeds in terms of price. And so the basket has kind of lower volatility, relative to the amount of return that it generates over time. But when we think about risk management, not in a financial sense, just in life, it's like, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
Okay. And maybe with the exception of like, monogamous marriage, which is clearly putting eggs in a basket, most of the things in life probably benefit from having a little bit of a plan B or spreading your bets a little bit.
Sure.
In real life. Bird in hand worth more than two in a bush, right? So these are all actually, there's a finance concept that aligns to all of these things, but there's a intuition or a life concept that actually has applicability everywhere that can get people to think more intelligently about risk and reward, get people to think more intelligently about, like I said, urgency or the time value of money, get people to understand the difference between what's certain and what's contingent. So an option versus, something that's an option, which is like a maybe, but may not, maybe not.
Sure. And
something that you own, which is a yes. And I think that would help people not only avoid a lot of financial mistakes, but I think it'll help people make a lot of just mistakes in life. Right. So those, so if I was, king for a day, I would definitely like have, a almost like requirement or, a movement towards people learning basic finance intuition and skill to be applied outside of finance, and a little bit about how to balance your checkbook, open a bank account, do your taxes and things like that, so that people can actually navigate life and don't get themselves either into trouble or waste a lot of energy. I mean, it's kind of ironic, right? We have sex education, but I think people could figure that out, but we don't have financial education.
Right.
Where there's like an infinite number of like documents and institutions and rules and laws that make it like Byzantine to figure out. Like, I mean, why not? Like, why wouldn't that be something that would be taught in health class or whatever?
Sure.
Or at least in the U.S. framework.
Yeah. And in your transition into from the States into India, like how did that play a part into your strategy? Like you had mentioned in one of the round discussions at I think it was at a Davos that you were jumping in at a very kind of at a baseline point where everything was just coming out of nothing, right?
Yeah.
Things are just sprouting out everywhere, and there's just the population is gigantic, the market is gigantic, but there's so many people that were just at the ground level.
Yeah.
And training smarter not investors, but training smarter consumers.
Yeah.
It was a big part of your kind of landing pad there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I moved to India in 2009, which was like right after the big global financial crisis. So I mean, I think everybody was a little bit in some version of their ground zero. Coming from an Indian family, having visited India a lot, but these are like personal family visits, which basically means, fly directly to the hometown of like my parents and sit and rot, alone for like a month and then come back to the US and not really experiencing India. Well, maybe I was experiencing real India, but I wasn't living my life in India. This was different. Now I went to a more cosmopolitan place and had a job there, like a executive role as CEO, and was trying to like build a life there. Mm-hmm. And so it gave me a different exposure to it. And I think that the things that jumped off the page, other than just population, all that, was, first of all, there's a baseline hunger and aspiration there that was not being fully met. So if you gave content, if you gave opportunity, access, if you gave ideas to people, they ran with it. I'm talking about young people in particular.
Sure.
The second thing that I noticed was that they might, in general, and even if they came from affluent families or had more worldly experience, they still might be the first generation of this, right? It's not a third generation stockbroker or a third generation doctor. It might be the first one who sort of like moved out of their family's like ancestral town. And so they're changing norms. Maybe their partner is somebody they met as opposed to somebody who their family's introduced. Sure. So there was also like a sense of, people who were sort of in their own tiny little way, tiny way to us, but to them, their whole life, in a big way, they were groundbreakers, or they're path makers. Sure. Of their own destiny. Obviously, look, I was working for Goldman Sachs, so the people who worked for us were all, varying degrees of quality between excellent and excellenter. There was, we were really, really fortunate that we hired some really incredible, we were able to hire incredible people because it's just a firm filled with incredible people, and that's our global standard. Sure. So maybe I saw a bit of a biased sort of, sample set, but you could see it. I mean, you could see it and feel it everywhere. That this kind of aspiration, the hunger, the ambition, and the creativity that comes from being in a messy place. Right. Like, we're sitting here in Singapore. I've lived in Singapore for, my family's been here for 8 years now. We love it. It's a great place, but it's very predictable. When you go to the airport, it'll be somewhere between 24 and 26 minutes. Right. Depending on how quickly you walk to the car and walk out of the car, right? Like that's pretty much all that's going to determine it, And so that creates a lot of efficiency, and that means you can get to pre-designated outcomes very quickly, but it doesn't necessarily foster a lot of the kind of confusion, the kind of antagonism, almost the kind of friction that creates creativity. Right. I mean, why does hip hop come from? Well, we can have the debate about Bronx versus Queens, but let's just say really came from kind of New York. Right. But did it really come from New York, or did it come from like the blues? But did it come from? Would that mean that it came from the blues guys in New Orleans, or was it really more like the blues influenced guys in Liverpool or in like Manchester? Or did it come from Africa? But did it come from Africans or people who were displaced? And so you can trace all of those things, but there's one thing in common about it. It's like none of these were easy. Those industrial towns in the UK were gutted. Like those, living in, New Orleans, and that those communities might have been quite difficult. Obviously, the projects of New York are a modern day version of difficult. Obviously being displaced from your home is obviously difficult. So they came from places that weren't efficient, perfect, or sometimes or very kind. They might have been actually a bit, and they came as a way. I don't know whether like there's a definitive answer to this, but you could say like maybe some people it was a coping mechanism. Maybe it was in some cases it was a way to escape a certain situation or just to get the emotion out. But there was a lot of feeling that came with that. So I think India, and the reason maybe why you see a lot of the Indian diaspora around the world having, what appears to be, sort of an unusual amount of success. Now, there is a law of large numbers, a lot of Indian people. So we're going to have a Nobel Prize winner, we're going to have a beauty queen, we're going to have a CEO, we're going to have a prime minister for sure, just at some point, right? Maybe not an MVP, NBA, center, but what, who knows? But the reality is that a lot of that, I think, comes from this kind of culture where people have had to hustle, had to innovate, had to surmount and kind of get clever or creative or enterprising around how they express themselves in their field, and fueled by a little bit of like that aspiration as well, which I don't want to say it's cultural because that's maybe anthropologically not true, but it's contextual.
Right. Speaking of kind of growing through the cement and kind of handling hardship.
Yeah.
Right. I had two questions that came in. Actually, three. Yeah, I think about it because we're coming into the end of an hour here. One of our classmates, Aslan Dennis Kurdu, who is the former chief of staff of Citi in New York, she asked a very thoughtful question. She said, "What do you think is unique about your value system or skill set that got you where you are today?"
It's a great question. Probably one that I should reflect and meditate on. Thank you for asking that, because maybe it'll help me, really own whatever might be a little bit of a hidden superpower.
Right.
But I think off the cuff, because I actually haven't thought about this much, I think that one thing that I have maybe in my heart, but I've been able to like learn to express more is, I believe in teamwork. There's no question about that. But I extra believe in the power of an individual. And that doesn't mean it's at the offense of teamwork, but it's like every single person is so capable of doing so much if they have the right opportunity, if they have the right, sort of like tools or platform. And non-linearity, which is kind of a singularity university concept, the kind of futurist Kurzweil's like view that things don't happen in a straight line, that they all happen. All that non-linearity, which goes back to why I don't want a next step or a deliverable for my business plans or strategy sessions, because I don't think that the opportunity is to go from here to here. I think the opportunity is to go from here to like here. Right. But if we plan to go from here to here, and that's where we'll end up if we succeed. But is that really a success? So one of my favorite quotes that's not from Star Wars, which means it's like my 12th favorite quote probably, is Michelangelo. He said, the greater danger for most of us lies not in aiming high and missing, but in aiming too low and hitting the mark.
Right.
And in fact, it's so much my favorite quote that when I retired from Goldman Sachs, that was the introduction to my retirement email. I actually said that. At one point, I think my poor kids having to listen to their dad gas on about this, I wrote it up or typed it up and taped it to the wall of our dining room so they could see it every day. Right. But this speaks to me like as the idea of like non-linearity and power of individual. It's like, send it, just go for it. Give yourself the chance to accidentally just do something insane that was unimaginable. Give yourself the chance to accidentally do that. Right. Worst case scenario, you're just where you are, basically. Yeah. And so I think that a lot of, to answer the question a little bit, I think that belief in people as individuals, again, you work together as a team, but each person there is valuable, and can bring their own like very, very unique set of superpowers to the table. I think has been a big part. And as I've gotten older, wiser, more experienced, I'm getting better at not only seeing that in people, but also not, but allowing it to happen. So like, I'm not trying to like be the smartest guy in the room anymore.
Right. Right.
You know, I actually want to be the dumbest guy in the room. So
Yeah.
the one thing you have to do is fill the room with smart people. But the other thing you have to do is believe that they're all smart.
Right.
Right. Or that they have something to offer that you don't yet.
Right.
And then I think when you have the position or the opportunity to also give people the nudge or give them the resources or give them the sort of magic feather, the Dumbo thing, where they themselves can find that.
Right.
That can be pretty magical as a leader. And that can be ultra magical, like when the group or the organization or the people or the community you're leading actually can express that collectively, and you get these like outrageously cool outcomes, which is what's happened, you know, in a couple of my jobs. Easy to say, hard to do in practice. But I think that is one thing that I'm realizing has set me somewhat apart, and I'm really leaning into that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the high point there about teamwork and the limitless dreaming, and yeah, that's it's very important, right? To all levels and all walks of life. Whoever's listening out there, that's just such a great reminder to kind of take life by the horns and
look, I mean, everybody should have in their life a great love story, and that should be with yourself, right? That should be with yourself. You can have many great love stories if you're fortunate to, but at least have one.
Yeah.
And it's one that you have about as much control over as anything you could possibly have control over, which is having that love story with yourself. Yeah. And because when you can embrace that and have that feeling about yourself, it's a lot easier than for other people to do it with themselves, but also for you to do it with other people. If you're really hard on yourself, chances are you're hard on other people. Mm-hmm. But if you actually treat yourself with a bit of grace and compassion, you probably, without even realizing it, do the same for other people too, and give them the permission to as well when you're in a situation where they're looking to you for that cue.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. You know, life goes in cycles. History tends to repeat itself.
Or rhyme, even if it doesn't repeat.
Right. Yeah. And you know, a lot of the times we keep coming back to these recurring themes on this podcast about productivity, about life hacks, about kind of getting dialed in. One of the recurring themes for high flyers or, you know, anybody else alike that is aspiring to achieve in their life is hitting times of turmoil and pressure. Like what do you find has helped you to handle overwhelming moments?
Yeah.
I can imagine managing, you know, a huge force of people, you know, in a new place, or turning conditions, all are not easy on the levels of stress.
Yeah, definitely not. Actually, I'll tell you a quick story because it happened so recently, and it's an interesting one because it forced me to reflect. So, as you know, I think, you know, I'm a bit of like I guess maybe 15 years ago, I started on a little bit of a health journey. Probably through the route of what people would have considered like biohacking, you know, experimenting a little bit on yourself, trying things to sort of short the process. Now I've become much more like, I'd say holistically, like about wellness. So, but by the way, I'm not like, that doesn't mean I'm spick and span, but like, it means that it's an area of huge curiosity for me. I try to live as much of that lifestyle as I can. Mostly, like I try to do it 80% of the time. So 20% of the time it could be a bad boy. I'm working on 80-20. I might be getting a little bit, my ratios off right now, but it's something I care about deeply. But one of the most influential people for me on that was a trainer that I had when I was in India, a young guy named Kiran. And he sort of brought my physical fitness levels and also my mindset about how to be healthy in all senses. He just awakened that. And really, I feel like he was not just a trainer, but a teacher, like a guru in some ways, despite being significantly less years of experience and age than me. We had a great relationship. I hadn't seen him for about 5 years. And just recently I went to go see him to go do a workout with him because I happened to be in Bangalore in India. And he looked at me and he immediately just like looked at me up and down. He's like, "You look younger." It's been 5 years. I'm like 50 plus. So, I was like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, everything. And I've got gray hair now. I didn't have it then. And all that. So I was like, that's interesting. He's like, but you look more stressed. It's like, interesting. It's like, I look younger, but more stressed.
Right.
But the last time you saw me, I was younger.
Right.
And you say I looked older then, but I had this big job like at a Wall Street investment bank, which should be stressful. And now I'm kind of in career sabbatical and I look more stressed. And we sort of workshopped that like in between sets. I was trying to buy time to catch my breath, between supers. And what we kind of came to was, he said, the stress that you were experiencing back then was external stress, right? Stress of the market, stress of like your responsibility, stress of your professional responsibility, stress of like life. And so, those you can kind of put boundaries on, you can kind of manage. You manage with your lifestyle, you manage with like some of the choices you make or the level of engagement you even have. Like how much do you care? Sure. In some ways, like are you able to detach from things? Yeah. The stress, he said, or intimated, he's like, you're experiencing now is coming from the inside. It's the things you think you're supposed to be doing or the things you think you're supposed to be like the questions you have, the worries you have, they're coming from the inside. There's no defense against that. Right. Other than suppression. But he's like, so he was, and I think he was dead on. It's like external stress is like putting more weight on the bar. Right. You can get stronger. Yeah. Internal stress, on the other hand, can be any number of different things. It could be like a fever. It could be like a cough. It could be, whatever. Pick your physiological sort of thing. But if it's emotional, then it's everything. Right. And some people might say it's like your vibration. Some people might say, it's your metabolism. Some people might say it's like your nervous system. But my view is it's like, it's you. Right. I don't even know where it is because I know where it is. It's here. Yeah. Right. It's not here trying to get here. Right. So I think that what I did well in my old life was just manage a lot of external stress, which is what people are trying to do. Right. What I'm learning to do now, so that I don't have some guy tell me that like I look younger but more stressed, and so I don't actually end up being older and more stressed, is think about what are those stresses that are coming from the inside, right? So you can talk about ice baths, and we can talk about like sleep hygiene, and we can talk about stoicism in a way to like manage all these external stresses or detachment, or make sure you get your cardio, whatever. But internal stresses are a lot more complicated because they're in here, and if it's in here, it's in here, and if it's in here and here, they're fundamental. They're not even molecular, they're atomic. They may not even be atomic, they may be subatomic. We're talking like quantum level of like infiltration into your entire being. And I'm still on that journey. I'm on that journey. But I think a lot of my efforts on that journey have been, and I've done some kind of straightforward things and some more off-piste, like, sort of creative things. A lot of it has been around just trying to understand myself, understand fears, understand events or moments in life, not just the traumas, but even like, tell me about a time you laughed so uncontrollably it hurt, right? Because there's probably something like what was going on then, like what gave you that reaction, what gives you joy, satisfaction, what you really care about. Right. But the problem is that it's hard to like those questions all seem like really, really easy because they're really easy to ask. It's really hard to answer if you're honest, and they're really hard to get to the fundamental truth. If you haven't spent any time with yourself, and that can mean, sometimes that can mean solitude. A lot of us are, particularly high performance people, are surrounded by people, right, and lonely. But it's possible to be alone and in perfect company. Right. But as they say, if you're alone and lonely, it's probably because you have bad company.
Yeah, food for thought. Wow, where can I go from here? Like, I think I could definitely sit for a lot longer. This is like, there's a lot to unpack here, and I think a lot of people will really enjoy, going in deeper in many directions with you. One of the questions actually that came in was from a gentleman who's also in a high performance network called the Young Presidents Organization,
aka
yes. YPO.
Yeah.
Younger gentleman who did high frequency trading via China and India.
Wow.
You may have met briefly. It's one of my brothers named Ethan Jung, and he was rightfully so, I guess, with his background working in India and also in China, also just scaling teams. He asked, and you're in with your kind of stress of importance on teamwork. He asked, how did you find or go about finding your A players in your teams?
That's a great question. I was a member of the YPO as well for many years. Great organization, by the way. I unfortunately during COVID let it lapse. We had moved countries, so it became a little tough. And now I'm not Y anymore. So even if I'm a P, I don't think I could be part of the O. But I guess I'll answer this by working in reverse. Instead of how did I find them, I'll try to figure out who they were and then how they landed on me. Right. And there wasn't I would say a single path. I think of one colleague I had in India. She had just transferred back to India from New York, and I was sort of looking for someone to do a chief of staff role, and I kind of had an idea of what I wanted in terms of characteristics or training or background. And she fit some of them, but not all of them. But not that she wasn't a misfit. But what I saw in her was just intent. And I also had a reference from somebody who I rated another senior partner said, this is the best person I've ever worked with at that level. And I'm like, that's interesting because she didn't grow up in the system. And, she's, a woman from South India that ended up on an internship, not internship, but sorry, an assignment there. And she's it's the best one I've ever worked with. I'm like, well, million French can't be wrong. Right. But what I saw in her was real intent. And now we still are in touch today. I mean, she's done fabulously well in her professional and, life. And it was that when she set out to do something, right, it was going to get done. Right. Another guy who I hired out of MIT actually earlier when I was in New York. And, this was one of these situations where a lot of different parts of the firm were they were all vying for him. And so I'm like, ooh, okay. If everybody likes him, everybody's trying to hire him. I have a little bit of a captain's pick because I was a recruiting captain. So I'm like, okay, Tony, you're working on my desk. Right. Because I'm just okay, you guys all like him. You know what? Yeah. I'm going to take him. Because clearly he's the number one draft pick. Right. So I was just going on reference. I mean, I met him and I liked him, but I was just look, he's,
pre-selection's been done. Yeah.
Pre-selection's been done. But then it's what you do with them, what you do with people afterwards. Sure. I mean, those are professional examples, but when I think about some of the people that we have put in our life and we work with, whether they're in a personal capacity or, my sons who are to professional race car drivers and the sort of system that we've put around them, the people who we've tried to select, you can't always guarantee that it's going to be as you wish, and you can't always guarantee that you can keep people. But the ones that I think we proactively wanted to have and ended up working out for a chapter or two in a real way. It was that it comes down to they were driven. It wasn't necessarily that they had all the answers or all the Rolodex or, or that even that their achievements necessarily stacked up, because you might've found people with better resumes or better, but it was they were driven. Success was important to them, collective success. But at the same time, they had not just a version of success that was only one way. It was they had to understand you, right? So there was kind of an empathy and understanding of your situation, understanding of our situation, our collective objectives, and really trying to succeed in a way that was sort of a composite. As a result of that, having these kinds of views, about how you maybe find people, you almost naturally, if your eyes and ears are open, you end up with actually a wide array of different personalities and types and backgrounds. So, I know it's it became super fashionable to talk about diversity and inclusion. Then it became less fashionable, and but I never really thought of it as like like trying to build a diverse team or trying to look for people who fit like different boxes than you're used to ticking. I was just looking for great people, but great not necessarily because of one like lens or based on like a set of criteria,
Sure.
but just great. And maybe you can call that energy or vibes or whatever. And then by the end of the day, you surround yourself with these folks on your team, and you realize that no two of them are alike. And so you ended up with a wide array of different perspectives, experiences, backgrounds, even sometimes orientations in terms of like what their objectives are.
Right.
So that's how that's what makes it sometimes difficult, but also what makes that's when you get like superior outcomes, is when you have a lot of different ideas coming to the table at once, but with everybody sort of aligned to the same thing. It goes back to my old point of like I believe in the team, but I believe in the individual. So you want individuals that can work together. You don't want to create a monolithic group of like just people or labor units. Right. I know it's not really like there's no secret sauce that I can think of other than that. Sort of that induction, but I've just been really fortunate, I guess.
Yeah, and a good radar.
Yeah, and I think I was looking for people's good qualities. I wasn't looking for reasons. No, I was looking for reasons. Yes.
That's powerful. Speaking of reasons for yes and no, we dug deep. We found a gentleman named Calvin Kung who was in the New York offices as an underling, just getting his first scratches in New York. And he asked the question. He's very straightforward. He's one of one of my favorite people because he's very close with our buddy Brian Wong as well.
Yes.
And he's a trained attorney. He cut his teeth at GS early in New York. And he's one of the only people I know, especially in Asia, that defies the norms in terms of how he departs a situation. He's always just like, all right, good to see you, Bunty. I gotta go.
Just walks out like peace. I love that.
At the end of the night, there's no like long hugs.
I love that. I love that.
No lingering. He's like, this is good.
The opposite.
The next minutes are billable, right? It's a lawyer thing.
Yeah.
But he said,
minutes are billable. That's true.
Bunty was king of his craft, master of his game in 2009. Made legendary cuts in not cuts, but made legendary marks in commodities, and was like kind of really a trailblazer in many ways. Why didn't he leave Goldman Sachs earlier?
Why didn't I leave earlier? Wow, I thought he was going to ask, why did I leave in the first place? It never occurred to me. Because I think that in the 23 years I was at Goldman, for the most part, until maybe the end, I never felt short of challenges. I never felt short of opportunities. There was something interesting around every corner. There was always work to do. And, for the most part, I felt like I had been given a good chance. There were times when I was disappointed about something. And, like I said, towards the end, obviously, maybe more so, maybe some of those things started to dissipate. But I guess, given the person who's asking the question and their style, I'll also just be blunt about some things. Money wasn't the reason that I was there, so money wouldn't necessarily be a reason why I would leave, which is why a lot of people leave, whether that firm or any other firm.
Sure.
Right. And so that wasn't my motivator. I wanted freedom. I wanted to be stimulated. I wanted responsibility and chance to make a difference. And then, of course, if I succeeded, I wanted, fair reward for that. And, money is part of a reward, but there's a lot of things that are not necessarily monetary that are part of the overall satisfaction. So that's really kind of it. But, if I get a little bit more personal, I loved a lot of the people I worked for, the people I worked with, the people who I was able to bring on board. And, I guess nominally you could say they worked for me, but I never felt like they worked for me. I felt like they worked with me. And, I had an opportunity to like, hopefully make their lives and, better and give them an opportunity to define their own success. I think it did some of that. I think I have a pretty good track record of bringing up talent. not just identifying it or or engaging it, but actually cultivating it. So it's just as simple as that. Like my needs were mostly being met. It wasn't complacency. I was not a battered spouse or anything like that. And it wasn't because, it was an offer too good to refuse. It was just, I felt very much at like some version of like, peace and simpatico. Now, a little bit of a personal thing also, my father died in an accident my senior year of college. And so there was a big void in my life right at the time I was entering the workforce.
Right.
But I was very fortunate that at Goldman, I also found, in a way, a home, a place that, felt like it had my back, so, that was like, that allowed me to be bold instead of fearful.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed me to grow instead of shrink. Specifically, there were a lot of people who I worked with, and I'd say in many cases they were men who became not father figures, that's overstating it, but they became important male figures in my life, which would have been true even if my dad was around. Because I think men especially need important male figures in their life that aren't their dad. It could be their uncle, it could be their, their tennis coach, it could be, the guy who buys beer for them, whatever. But I think, boys, men need that along the way. They need to learn different ways so they can figure out their way. And I was really, really, especially in the early stages, just surrounded by a group of people who it's like when they're picking on me, I was like, people would, people should be jealous that they have people who love them so much that they can pick on me like this,
Yeah.
Like you wish that you had people who cared about you so much that they would beat you up so much, in a good way, like in a positive way. They supported me. I mean, I'm still in touch with all these people, 20, 30 years later. And so again, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying I had a bunch of father figures because that's not what they were, but I felt like I had brothers, uncles, a village, a tribe, a platoon, a trench, whatever. Sure. And we all followed our different paths and moved at different paces or had different things that we wanted. We're different stages of life too. Some of them were my age, some of them were twice my age. But I think that community or tribe was a big part of it too. I felt like a bit of a mayor at the firm because every year maybe my P&L would get reset to zero, as they say, you're only as good as your last trade.
Right.
But I felt like my engagement with the firm was just growing and growing and compounding because, I knew more people, I knew more things about the firm, I had more access, I built up like big chip stacks of credibility and could use those, so I had more room to play.
Right.
So that's what it is. And that's why I guess maybe I'm, a dying breed, but that's why I sort of like, I don't advocate like this career monogamy where it's like go work for the same company for the same year or for the rest of your life every year. Right. But it's like you can keep some things constant for a really, really, really long time as long as there are other things inside of that are constantly changing and evolving, right? So if you have to do the same job over and over every single day and it doesn't change, it doesn't matter. You can keep changing companies, you're going to burn out.
Right.
But if you are at the same company or the same organization or the same whatever platform, but every day is a different day, every day is a different challenge, then you're like Warren Buffett tap dancing to work every day. They build a statue of you because you have the benefit of like being in this environment that's kind of like stable that you feel like you're growing into and compounding, but you have the excitement, you have the stimulation, and you have the kind of the dynamism of like things constantly changing and shifting. You don't have to be like some move fast, break things, tear it apart, rip it and grip it, grip it and rip it like sort of entrepreneur or maverick to create a lot of like excitement, in your life that keeps you interested. You just have, it can be at the same place or it can be with the same person or the same people. Right. It just, you have to consciously make sure you're seeking those stimuli, those changes.
New moons, new honey.
That's right. That's right.
I like that. So we're square into the lightning round where I'm going to show you a couple things. Yeah. Give you the opportunity to say one word or one very brief response. Shoot from the hip. What's one thing that most people wouldn't know about you or expect?
I'm a crybaby.
Awesome.
But when I say that, it doesn't mean that like you can make me cry.
Yeah.
It means like I cry when I hear certain songs. I cry when I watch like Pixar movies. You know, I cry sometimes when I'm telling a story about myself or hearing somebody else's story because I'm an emotional creature.
Right.
Cry baby. Proud of it.
So when Goldman Sachs held you hostage and filmed this video.
Oh my God.
I mean, when they gave you the opportunity to film this video.
I can't wait to see this.
You mentioned that the culture is the secret sauce, right? And you've sort of went kind of deep into that already. But if you had to say in one
If I was to summarize our culture in a few words, I would say excellence, integrity, teamwork, and impact.
Right. So do you still feel the same way? Is that the secret sauce that sets you apart from other mega banks and other institutions that manage and move the markets?
So, I've been, just for nota bene, I've been out of Goldman Sachs for since the end of 2018. So I can't say for sure.
Right.
But at the time, 100%. And I think any organization or any group, I mean, even my own household, I think those are values that I still stand by. Having a standard of excellence is important. Wanting to make a difference is important. So I still stand by it. And I think most amazing teams, groups, organizations, people do, they have versions of that. Maybe not every single one of them applies in the same way, but I don't think there's escaping that.
Sure. Shoot from the hip. Crypto.
Yep.
All right. Wall Street bets.
Nope.
Top 5 rappers.
In order?
Any order.
Okay. These are not in order. I think Rakim specifically, but the Eric B. and Rakim days.
Right.
You have to put Jay-Z in there because he's a business.
Yep.
And that's important.
Yeah. I'm a businessman.
Yeah.
And this is a businessman.
Yeah. Exactly. I think you have to put, look, I'm going to say Dre, but I really mean Snoop. I think Dr. Dre's contribution was his curation.
Right.
Eminem, right? So that's a catch-all. That's my cheat to get 8 names in without using 5, with 5 slots. Okay, so that's 3, Dre. I think as a lyricist, I mean, Biggie is definitely there.
Yeah, tone, rhythm.
Just, flow, everything.
Girth.
Definitely had girth. And then I'm going to extra cheat now, and I'm going to draft the entire Wu-Tang Clan.
Excellent.
They brought East Coast back.
Good for the children.
They created a whole, idea that you can create a persona almost, like an entire subculture around something. And it was really geeky, dorky, nerdy stuff, like watching kung fu movies and all that, and that they just owned. They owned, and they made it a kind of brand.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. Podcasts or books?
Podcasts.
Awesome. Here we go. Let's go to the top. And this final one, as I mentioned, you've kept a interesting online life, very focused in one lane. But I'm very curious as to.
This is my.
Why is it that when I look up Vivek Bunty Bohra on
you
YouTube,
can't find an OnlyFans account? Oh.
I find a random 5-second video.
A 5-second video of me swinging a golf club
in front of a Toyota banner.
With no ball there.
What is going on?
What is going on? So, I have no idea.
The context or place.
Well, I mean, clearly this was, one of these corporate golf events.
The Royal Orchid mean anything?
Yeah, the Royal Orchid, was one of the sponsors. It's a hotel chain in India, fabulous chain, actually run by my best friend.
Okay.
And
that's something.
One of my best friends in India. Well, my best friend in India.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening here is that they do like everybody who's playing, they take a picture of you with this, so you have like a memento if you want it or whatever, and also to promote.
Right.
But I think my partner who I was playing with, who's like a ringer, I think he took the video, and it looked like a good swing.
Nice.
Because there's no ball there, and you didn't see where it landed. So it's like, I don't know, where did I post that though?
It's on YouTube.
What?
Yeah.
Bro.
Somebody else posted it?
Somebody else posted it.
The internet is forever. It's like your video game avatar before you start the
Yeah,
game. Right?
yeah. So I was just like, that. Okay, got it. It's like, Vivek Bunty Bohra.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to like,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. So, man, like I said, I could keep learning from you and being inspired all day, but unfortunately,
thanks,
we
man.
are confined to the time frame, and we have something very exciting. Another exciting guest from your crew.
Yes, sir.
Today, from the Bunty crew. But we have one last question.
Okay.
Who came from our classmate on the islands of Singapore?
Ooh, hey.
Yeah, from Ivan Vachkov.
Oh, there we go. All right,
another
Do your worst, baby. Let's go.
Another hilarious individual. Just
Yes,
so sharp
indeed.
and full of life and full of energy. He said there's an inside joke that Bunty has with Ruben that goes something like, I have 3 words for you, Bunty Bohra. He said, I don't know the origin, but it's been around for so long. What 3 words do you have for us?
Okay, so the joke is, I got 3 words for you. Bunty Bohra, which of course is 2 words.
Right.
I don't know. Ruben and I are both so smart that we're idiots. Love. Bit of cliche. Respect. Fight.
All right, let me check both of your ears. Fight.
Fight.
All right, my brother. Thank you so much. It's been an
All
honor
right.
to have you here.
As
Looking
always.
forward to the next segment here and many chapters ahead. Always a pleasure.
Always, bro. Always. My man.